Stephanie Dobson is back with us this week. Stephanie is a lawyer and mediator in Lloydminster at Hanka Divorce Law and Mediation. We're here for another episode of Healthy, Thriving Family After Divorce. So Stephanie, this week we are going to be talking about how spousal support works for couples going through separation or divorce. So first question, let's start with the basics. And what is spousal support?
So of course, as usual, this is a very complicated topic, but I'm going to try to just break it down. So spousal support is money that's payable from one spouse to another when there's a breakdown of a relationship. So of course, there's legislation that deals with this. So there's the Federal Divorce Act, and then there's the provincial counterparts for unmarried spouses. But that legislation sets out the objectives of spousal support and the factors to consider whether spousal support is appropriate. So in any analysis, we have a two-step process. So first, we look at entitlement. So until and unless it's determined that a person is actually, the word entitled to spousal support, we don't move forward in the analysis. So the second step is once entitlement has been found, then we look to how much for how long. So let's go on to that next step.
Okay, well, let's talk about that, Stephanie. How does a person know if they are in fact entitled to spousal support under step one?
Yeah, so I know, the word entitlement is a legal word in this context. And in my experience, it's been a word that can sometimes cause fire to start to come out of people's words. They don't like the word entitlement, but in here, it's just a legal term. So how is that entitlement determined? So you have to fit under one of three headings to be entitled to spousal support. So the first one is called contractual support. So in this case, it would be if a person is under a contractual obligation to provide support to their spouse. So an example, an interspousal agreement, a prenuptial agreement, or any other kind of contractual agreement. So that can arise anytime, before starting to live together, once you've been living together, or even once you've been separated. So number two is called compensatory support. So viewers can think of compensatory support as looking backward into the relationship to compensate one spouse for decisions that have been made during the relationship that may affect that spouse's income earning potential in the future. So for example, this often arises if one spouse has taken time off of work to care for children, or even if you've geographically moved to follow a spouse's career advancements. So the goal here is to compensate. So compensatory support is to compensate for economic advantages or disadvantages resulting from the breakdown of the relationship. So the third one, so we've got contractual support, compensatory support, and then the third one is non-compensatory support. So this is, I think of this like forward-looking support. So it's based on your need going forward and your ability to become self-sufficient after the relationship ends. So we can think of budgets, economic interdependence between spouses, or even changes to the standard of living as a result of the breakdown of the relationship.
So Stephanie, if spousal support is payable, how much would a person then have to pay?
Again, it's complicated, but it's become more formulaic in its approach with the onset of what's called the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines. So in 2005, they came into effect, similar to the child support guidelines, but these aren't as mandatory. They're more called advisory. So there's two different formulas under the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines: when child support is payable and when child support is not payable. So in order to figure out how much is payable, we have to input things like each of the spouse's income levels, the child support amount that's payable, and then outspits an amount as a range. So in every calculation, there's the low end of the range, the mid, and then the high end of that range. So within that range, there's of course room for negotiations as far as where within the range you would fit. And of course, it's not an exact science.
And how long is spousal support payable for? How do you figure that out, Stephanie?
Well, again, under the Spousal Support Advisory Guidelines, that provides us some guidance. So there's a few rules that come into play. And of course, it always can get complicated, but let's look at some of the guiding principles. So first, there's two situations where spousal support will go on what's called indefinitely. So the first is if the spouses have lived together for over 20 years. And the second is called the Rule of 65. So it's where the number of years that you've lived together plus the recipient's age is over 65. Now, the word indefinitely doesn't mean forever. It just means without a specific end. So another guiding principle is that if there's no child support payable, then the duration is usually somewhere between 0.5 and 1 year for every year that the spouses live together. So if you live together 10 years, the range is somewhere between 5 to 10 years in length. And lastly, if there is child support payable, then there's a little bit more flexibility in the duration depending on the circumstances. So it could be that same 0.5 to 1 year principle, or it could be in relation to when the children start or finish full-time school.
All right, Stephanie, well, thank you so much for joining us again this week, and we will be back next week to chat more about this subject.
You bet. Thanks.